Kia ora, ko dia hau hara mai. Welcome to today's homemade Let's Cook. Today we're making a 1970s poke cake. So there's going to be some poking involved, and that just means we're going to put some holes in our cake. And for this particular cake, we're going to fill it with some jelly. We're going to make that up while our cake is in the oven. So let's make our cake to begin with, and I'm going to use my trusty ring tin for this one. So I've got that pre-greased and it's got baking paper on the bottom, so that's ready to go. Starting off with 4 eggs, and I'm using my mixed master today. And then we've got 3/4 of a cup of oil. And I'm just going to give that a quick boil. And then add slow additions of 1 cup of sugar. And we'll probably speed this up a little bit for you. Now when that's done, we want to add alternate flour and milk. So we've got 1 3/4 cups of self-raising flour and 1/2 cup of milk. Actually just added another 1/4 cup of flour there, so that's 2 cups of self-raising flour in total. So it's quite a runny mixture. Just put that in, and that's going into a moderate oven . For around 1/2 an hour. And while that's cooking, we're going to come back and make our jelly. So time to make up our jelly. So I've got raspberry jelly here, and I've actually just left in the packet just enough so that I can pop that over the top of the cream that we're going to top our cake with. So I've got the rest of the jelly in a pourable container, and that will help us when it comes time to pour this jelly on top of the poke cake. So give it a good stir until those jelly crystals dissolve. And we want this to cool down until it's about at room temperature. So I'm not quite sure how long that's going to take. So I'm actually going to pop this in the fridge to allow it to cool down, just to speed up the process. And I'll see you when the cake comes out. So the cake is out of the oven, and now I'm just going to let it cool for 5 minutes, and then we're going to pop the holes in and then fill it with the jelly. I'll see you shortly. So now it's time for the interesting part. Now the question that you might ask is, do I leave the cake in the tin or do I take it out of the tin? Neither are wrong, but for this particular one, we're going to leave it in the tin. It's a little bit less messy, and hopefully that will work for us. Being in the ring tin, I have loosened it already, so I know that it will come out. If you take it out of the tin, you need to be really careful, but it will result in a more even spread of your jelly or whatever topping that you are using. So we're about to poke our holes in the cake, and you want to make sure that these are relatively evenly spaced. Now that's probably going to be a little bit tricky in a round cake, but I'm going to do what I think is best. Now I'm using a dowel. You could use a wooden spoon or a skewer, and look, it depends on the size of your cake as well. So just evenly spacing them. I am pushing down to the bottom of the cake. what we're going to do is going to pour this jelly over the top, which is now at room temperature. Some might say you need to pour it in hot. You could do that as well if you wanted to. And then I'm going to pop this into the fridge, and that will allow the jelly to set. Obviously the cake is going to absorb this as a fluid at this stage. And I'm just going to try and make sure that I pour in enough so it goes down those holes, but not too much that it starts to completely seep down the sides. And there's going to be probably a fine line. Obviously the bigger your holes are, the easier it will be to direct the jelly. You can just turn it around for a bit more ease. Now I am going to top this with cream later on once it's cooled down. And as I said before, we're keeping aside some of those jelly crystals so we can put that on the top for a nice finish. Now a lot of this, because of the shape of my cake, is running down the sides. I don't think that's going to matter too much. And of course, as much as we've made up a certain amount of jelly, don't have to use all of it either. So if this is your first time in making a poke cake, as it is mine, then it's a very good test case. And maybe the next time we make it, we might have better luck. But you won't know the final result until you cut into it. And that's half the fun. So I've used about 3/4 of the mixture. So as I say, I'm going to pop this in the fridge. While it's cooling down, I'm going to make my whipped cream, which I'm going to make out of just regular cream and icing sugar. And I'll come back to ice it later on. I'll see you then. Now it's time to see how our cake has turned out. I've saved myself the embarrassment of turning it out of the pan, but it actually came out quite easily. And as you'll see, the colour or the jelly has soaked well into the cake. The proof will be in the cutting, of course. Of course, cream or your topping will cover up a myriad of issues if you have them. So I'm just going to generously put cream on top of mine, and as I said before, I've made mine out of whipped cream, and I've used just regular cream and icing sugar to do that. I haven't added anything else, and I also just set aside some of the jelly crystals so I can pop that on top for some effect as well. So I'm just going to generously dab the cream around. And we should have enough for the sides as well. So I'm going to coat it in best I can. And you'll see I've already put it in a pan and on a wire rack. And the reason I popped it on the wire rack is because that jelly that was sitting in the bottom of the pan still hasn't quite solidified, so you probably don't want it to while it's still in the pan, otherwise it might make it a little bit more tricky to get out. It's quite warm in here today, so I need to do this as quickly as I possibly can. And what I'm going to do a bit later is hopefully produce a really cool thumbnail from what we've managed to achieve here. I think it looks good, nice and rough. Just give it quite a wave effect. Let's get around the front as well. Easier if I just turn it around. And of course we'll be storing this in the fridge. You can use different toppings as well, of course. You could just use a regular icing as well. And of course, we haven't talked about using different flavours of jelly, or even the cake mix that you might use. This type of recipe is suitable for using just a packet cake mix as well. Just take some of the extra work out of it. Now I know that looks a bit rough and ready, but I think the idea of your 1970s cake is that it's a little bit on the rustic side. And the proof, of course, will be in the eating. So now I've got my jelly crystals, and I'm just going to sprinkle them on top. And because I've got this already in the cake container, it doesn't matter if that splashes over the sides. This would make a fairly good party cake as well. Thanks for joining me for Homemade Let's Cook. I hope you enjoy making and both eating your poke cake, and I'm looking forward to cutting it up a bit later on. Thanks for joining me. Ka kite.